The Science of Sport podcast with sports editor Mike Finch and sports scientist Professor Ross Tucker.
We're delighted to have one of cycling's greatest legends of the Pro Tour, Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio, on our podcast today. And the reason why we got her is because we're just a few days after the completion of the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. Make sure I get the full name correctly as you get here in the podcast. I didn't quite get that right. But it's one of those events which kind of captured the imagination of pretty much everybody around the world. We've seen the development of women's cycling happening, and we've seen various discussion points happening about the sport and what can change. We've also noticed that Ashleigh's put up some interesting blogs on her blogging platform, Rocket Carver website, where she talks about the state of professional cycling. We want to kind of get into the nuts and bolts about that. But before we kind of get into that, let's just go through what Ashleigh's done in her life. And she's 39 years old, but she's done a huge amount in her professional career, almost been a pro for almost 16 years. If you look through her palmares, it's just a list of top threes, wins, and some fantastic performances in the Grand Tours. Most notably, I think, if you look at the Giro Rosa, which is the Giro d'Italia for women, in 2021, she was second. In 2020, she was sixth. In 2019, she was fourth. And in 2018, she was second, amongst other appearances there. She was sixth in the Tour de France in 2023. She's finished and she's won the Tour de Romandie in 2022. So I could literally spend probably the next 10 minutes talking about her various performances in classics around the world and the Grand Tours that she's done. But she comes to us from a very experienced perspective, somebody who started off when professional cycling for women was very much in its infancy, and she's seen the growth of the sport from those early days right through to where it is now, where it's really kind of reached another level where audiences are bigger and we're all more interested in what's happening, and the women's tour itself is becoming one of those events that we really do tap and watch. And I think what I got out from this podcast was not only how she races Zwift, because she is a world champion on the esports catalog, but also some of the insights she has about what the challenges that face professional cycling are sometimes quite shocking, but also quite enlightening as to what she's had to deal with in her life and what a lot of pro cyclists have to deal with in their professional careers.
Yeah, my overriding impression is that she's maybe had a 16-year career on the bike, but she's probably only less than halfway through her cycling life. And she's going to go on to do a lot more, because the way she talks is like you can hear it's someone who's thought very deeply about how to make the sport better and how to run a team better and how to structure a season. And I mean, everything from the technical to the managerial, she's thought about it all, you know? So it's, she's going to, from a South African point of view, she's our cycling Zola Bud, right? Like the trailblazer, who's inspired, no doubt. I mean, we had can we claim her, the yellow jersey wearer from this year's tour?
Yeah, Kim Lecourt's Pinard. Yeah,
she might have a Mauritian flag on her back, but she was made in South Africa, proudly South African. But I think in addition, like Ashleigh went over to Europe and she showed a way for many cyclists to go. But it is really interesting to hear her talk about some of the challenges that have emerged. And the growth of the sport is going to throw those up. And it must be pretty exciting to be like riding that wave.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. I think she is at the start of her career because, as you'll hear in this podcast, she really does think about the sport. And I remember one of the questions that we were thinking about before we did the podcast was, if you're going to change the circumstances and talk about how riders need to be looked after more than just performances on the bike, my first reaction was to say, well, it's pro cycling and therefore that's what it's about. It's about results. But actually her answer really kind of enlightened me as to how the benefits of looking after cyclists beyond just their results actually can benefit the results themselves and the team as a whole. So she was being quite enlightening in terms of that, and certainly opened my eyes to the way of thinking around looking after riders and how much of a bigger problem it is, particularly women's cycling, but probably in men's cycling as well.
Yeah, I mean, like you'll hear she's experienced and then identified things that need to change. So let's call them problems. Problem identification, tick. And I think she's got a good idea for what those solutions are, but obviously no one's going to do that alone. So I hope that she gets the support to try and implement some of the changes, you know? For the benefit of so I mean, I hope it's a first conversation we have with her, because I'm pretty confident that in 2 or 3 years' time, she'll have made strides towards achieving some of the things that she wants to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, enjoy our conversation with Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio.
Welcome back. You are listening to the Science of Sport podcast.
So, Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio, it's lovely to talk to you, not only as a cycling enthusiastic like Ross and I both are, but also somebody who's one of our fellow South Africans. But you're talking to us from Spain. Just tell us a little bit about your Rocacorba cycling. Well, it's not really, it's like a tourism business, isn't it? To just give you a chance to advertise what you do there, because it's quite amazing. And I've seen some of the facilities you have there. It looks like a place that I would want to visit.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's great to be on the podcast with you guys. So I'm talking from my home, Rocacorba Cycling, but yes, it is of course also a boutique hotel and cycling tourism business. So essentially, we pride ourselves on being sort of a one-stop cycling experience. So accommodation, rental bikes, guiding, dinner, breakfast, anything to make your stay as comfortable and as wonderful as possible. We really specialize in bespoke. So, whatever you're looking for, we do our best to meet your needs, whether that's coming and having a set out, guided tour with local guides showing you around, taking you on your rides, or whether it's coming and just self-guiding using Garmin's or Oahu. We tailor to everybody's needs. And it can also be obviously like a big group that comes and, fills out the whole place, or it's couples or, smaller families coming. So yeah, we really do cater for just about anything. And yeah, the vision behind Rocacorba Cycling was, I suppose, first and foremost, I'm actually qualified as a process engineer, and I got into cycling later in life. So even with the onset of my pro cycling career, I was always thinking and always, I have a bigger picture mindset. Strategy is a passion of mine. So throughout my cycling career, I was always thinking of how to positively influence women's cycling, how to get more people following women's cycling, and also how to create longevity for myself and my husband, Carl, living in Europe, away from South Africa, not practicing as engineers at the time. How do we make sure that we set something up for ourselves longer term? And so, cycling tourism business was, just a natural fit. We live in the most beautiful part of Europe for riding your bike. Girona is just an incredible place. There's such a great selection of all different types of roads, whether it's big climbs, rolling terrain, coastal loops. The roads are super safe. Cars are really patient. There's great restaurants. There's just everything you need to really enjoy riding your bike. And we loved living here as pros. And so we decided, well, it would be great to share it with the rest of the world. And at the same time, tick the box of people who came and stayed with us at Rocacorba Cycling. I really believe that more and more people display interest in women's cycling through a connection, so if you meet the athlete, or if they come to my home, they see my memorabilia, they ask some questions, who is Ashleigh, that would also convert them into fans. And that was, of course, the early days of our business, 2018. We weren't having a lot of TV exposure at the time. So that certainly did work. Now it has changed a little bit. Of course, there is a lot more TV exposure. So more and more people are coming here because they watch me on TV and they want to meet me. But it's just, we love it, living on what is actually like a small holding. So it's a farm. So it's just outside of Girona, 25 minutes outside of Girona, but close to another city called Banyoles with a lake. So we feel, if you come and stay, you feel like you're in the countryside, but within, a 10-minute walk, you're in the town of Banyoles, and right at the foot of Rocacorba, which is a climb. So a really famous climb in the area.
I know that Ross is probably going to tell you that he's coming to Girona for the second time this year because he loves it so much. So Ross, you're spending a couple of months in Girona, aren't you? So I know you're going to want to go and visit Ashleigh where she is.
Yeah, I was there last year. Amazing place. It's so cool because you can ride. I remember doing like 100K rides with less elevation than in Cape Town, or you could make a left and then you could climb 800 meters in like 10Ks.
Yeah, exactly. Huge variety.
And like Girona is so cool, like the coffee vibes, the restaurant, it's so cool. So I said to myself, got like a window. Why not go for 2 months, see what it's like, and if I like that, I'll go for more. I'd love to buy something in Johannesburg. So I'm coming there in mid-September till the end of October.
Okay, cool. Well, you must come pop by on a ride to Banyalis and have a coffee at our place.
I'd love to.
Sounds like a good plan.
Mm.
So actually, I think the reason why we wanted to chat to you today, because we're just a couple of days after the Tour de Femmes, which happened 3 days ago, the time that the Tour de France Femmes, let's get the avec Zwift, let's just call it by its full name. Mm-hmm. And we kind of want to get your impressions, first of all, about women's cycling in general, because there's one of the sort of senior members of the pro peloton. You've been there 15 years racing at the top. You've got many top achievements across all the variety from the classics to the tours. Looking at the state of the cycling now, it seems to me that women's cycling has kind of reached another level of excitement and, I guess, enthusiasm for people watching it.
Yeah, of course. I think this edition of the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift was, the best yet, if we look at all aspects of it. So, last year was really, really exciting in terms of the racing. It came really down to the wire in terms of who took the overall win. This year was just as exciting, but I think, what I'm referring to is that, the crowds, the noise happening on social media was really, really on another level this year. And I think, in a way, unfortunately, I've spent the last 2 editions, on the sideline observing from the outside. Last year, because of injury, I broke my back last year and didn't make it back in time to do the tour. And this year, unfortunately, wasn't selected to take part. But I'm blown away by how it's just so well supported, so many people out on the sides of the road. And it's about time we stop, sort of talking like this. It's so great to see because at the end of the day, I think women's cycling has always been super exciting. It just took a bit of time, and I've experienced all of this. It took time to really, for people to bite on like the ASO and to really see its potential and to invest in it. But I think we just keep proving year after year, that we're a force to be reckoned with, and that the people want to see women's cycling. So it was great to
give us an idea of what it was like maybe 10 years ago when you first started off as a pro. We know that, men's cycling's always been up there. There's always the big money involved, but you get a sense that when you first started as a pro, just kind of making sure that you could make ends meet was tough, even you were at the top of the game. Give us a sense of what it was like 10, 15 years ago and what it is like now for the top level of the sport.
Yeah, so it was very, very different 15 years ago when I first started. So, for me, it was a case of actually at that time, the racing scene in South Africa was really, really active. It was really competitive with, MTM and Quebecer and all the pro teams that existed in South Africa. And so I started, with the Cycle Lab, basically had a team, which was, Momentum, Biogen, Momentum Toyota, a couple of different iterations, but a really professional setup in South Africa. And I was actually really lucky that at the time, the owner of the team, Roy Gershow, he really had a big picture mindset. And when he noticed my talent through, obviously he was really almost ahead of the curve, with power testing and power data and coaching and all of that. So when I first did a power test for the team, he immediately noticed that I had potential to be a world-class athlete. And so it was really thanks to him and Andrew McLean, of course, that they helped to lay a path for me, to Europe. So it was actually at the end of my studies in 2009, really, that we made a trip as the Biogen Toyota team to France to race the Tour of Ardèche, which actually still exists. And that's where we made contact with the Lotto Belisol outfit at the time. And that's how I managed to get a pro ride the next year. And Roy even went so far as to creating opportunities for Robin de Groot, Joe van der Winkel. So it was all part of a plan for the London 2012 Olympic Games. But at the time, when I joined the Lotto Belisol team in Europe, I was not paid a salary at all. So it was really thanks to the South African setup. So, Roy, Andrew with the Cycle Lab, Biogen Toyota setup, that I got a salary actually from South Africa. But that meant that I really had to race all year round. So my my obligations, of course, were to race in South Africa during the South African season, so our summer and the winter in Europe, and then spend the South African winter in Europe racing the scene over here, which was important to be able to become one of the best in the world. So I think that was, again, Roy and myself, I suppose, we kind of led the way in terms of, if you really want to be now at the level, for example, where Kim is, in the yellow jersey, going for world championships and big victories at Olympic Games, you really have to be racing in Europe. So, yeah, when I first came over, it was a challenge. Of course, trying to make ends meet. I was very lucky to have the support of South African sponsors, because, of course, a lot of the time I was in Europe. So we had to be creative in how we gave exposure to the sponsors. But year by year, I obviously showed my potential, and eventually in 2014, I got a proper pro contract here. But even then, the money was way less than what it is now. But at least it was much better than trying to make ends meet on a South African salary. But yeah, I mean, we'd race our hearts out at a Giro, for example, where, that was kind of my big grand tour for the majority of my career. But you'd be racing your heart out for 10 days, and you'd be lucky if people back home in South Africa could follow, because it really took having a real interest to follow. So it was Twitter and following people's blogs and, pro cycling stats to be able to even know, what happened on that day. And then for me, the real turning point, I would say, was the COVID pandemic, which is actually quite interesting, because a lot of people thought that the COVID pandemic would set women's cycling back, because we'd already started making a bit of momentum. UCI introduced a rule that any women's cycling race at the highest level. So now we have World Tour, but at the time it was like a World Cup series. To be able to qualify for that license to be a World Cup, the race organizers had to do a highlights package, So they made, some like stipulations to be at that level. So that was the starting point of exposure. But it was actually during the COVID pandemic that everything changed, because with the COVID pandemic and no real world racing, of course, the Tour de France, it was a question mark whether it would happen for the men in that year. And so ASO contacted Zwift to do a virtual Tour de France, and Zwift have always championed equality. Everything that they've done, they've always done equal. So they set out, of course, if we can do a Tour de France virtual, but we're only doing it if there's a women's version as well. And so that was really the turning point. So in the COVID pandemic, in the toughest year worldwide for so many industries, finally, women's cycling, we had the opportunity to have access to the biggest stage, which was the Tour de France, the virtual Tour de France. It was equal stages, equal amounts of coverage, both men and women. And that was really the turning point. I won the Queen stage of this virtual Tour de France on Zwift. And at that time, thankfully, it was open. I could go out the next day for a ride, and I rode through Girona, and it was mind-blowing how that visibility made such a big impact just literally overnight. Riding through Girona, having just won the Queen stage, stopping at a coffee shop, and, Carl sort of saying to me, do you realize people are pointing? They recognize who you are. And then leaving Girona, no joke, a car came up next to me and slowed down, and the phone was stuck out the window to take a photo. And I was like, whoa, I've never experienced anything like this. So it was tangible, how important that exposure was and how quickly it made a difference. And of course, with the viewership numbers and the popularity of the women's version of the virtual Tour de France, ASO suddenly started to realize, okay, women's cycling is worth investing in. It can make us some money. And then, of course, Zwift coming on as a title partner, that was the turning point for women's cycling. And I'd say that's how women's cycling has just really exploded. It took the Tour de France to give us the stage and the platform to really, make that inflection point. And since then, I mean, it's crazy how things have changed. Salaries have tripled, quadrupled, interest is just, on another level. So yeah, since then, women's cycling has gone from being something that, I pursued because of passion and, the fact that I wanted to represent my country at the Olympic Games. I wanted to go for an Olympic medal. I wanted to be one of the best in the world, to being a career path, for young women. So now we see, young girls can really look up to us, aspire to become pros, and can really put their focus on it, from a young age. It's really changed a lot.
I mean, it's an amazing insight, that, because it's certainly not something I realized. But let's not also forget that one of the things that you did most notably was you won the esports challenge, I think in 2021 on Zwift. So you became a world champion in esports. You've got a lot of things that you relate to that Zwift platform that are really great. And how was that experience in terms of winning that world championships? Do you feel that really pushed you into another stratosphere, or did the road real version of things not really take that sort of thing into account? How important was it for your career, in other words?
Yeah, well, it's a really special achievement for me, to be honest, because more than being a world title, I really am proud of how I managed to turn adversity into opportunity. So it's, if I'm totally honest, it's really, really difficult as a non-European rider to be successful at a world champs, just because we don't have the same support infrastructure experience that European nations do. I mean, there's no doubt that professional cycling is a European sport first and foremost, before it is a world or global sport. So we have a lot of challenges as non-Europeans to be successful in professional cycling. Of course, if you make if you find a place for yourself on a pro team, then that's different, because your trade team provides you with the equal support that any other European would. But that has its own challenges, in terms of visas and being able to live in Europe. But when you race for your national team, there's no comparison, between the support I have as a South African to the Dutch or the Italian riders. So it was quite a hard learning curve for me through the early part of my career, because, I knew I had the talent to be a world champion. I'm one of the best cyclists in the world. But to pull it off on the day is really, really difficult without having a 5-woman team who can make it all the way to the final to support you. Of course I would have teammates, but their experience just didn't match mine. So, I couldn't really rely on them for support. So after, disappointment after disappointment at World Champs and Olympic Games, there was actually a point in my career, I'd say probably after the Rio Olympic Games, that I just kind of felt like, okay, I have to kind of stop putting so much focus on this, because I put so much into the preparation of the Olympic Games and the World Championships, and then I'm always disappointed afterwards because I don't manage to deliver, what I believe I can. And so I kind of felt like I need to put my focus on my trade team aspirations, and I just need to treat, World Champs and Olympic Games as, of course, a wonderful opportunity to represent your country, but I need to go there with less expectation. So always I decided I'll control what I can leading up to. I'll make sure that I arrive on the start line in the best possible shape, to be the best version of myself. But I have to accept that I can't control the uncontrollables, and just make the most of the race. And so when it came to the 2020, COVID pandemic, I had almost given up on a world title. And then the opportunity arose, through the COVID pandemic. I really, I realized the potential of Zwift, first and foremost. It was actually almost because of Rock Cycling that I realized, okay, I need to be on Zwift, because we can't have guests at our accommodation, but I can ride with them, on the virtual platform. So that's how it started. I set up a Rock Cycling ride, to engage with guests who had stayed with us in the past and future guests who couldn't make it during the pandemic. And that was the first, mind-blowing moment, was how your reach in the virtual world is just so insane, so the community building aspect. But then I started, of course, the only place I could train for 6 weeks was on Zwift, because we had a really hard lockdown. We couldn't go out. And I started to see the potential of Zwift in terms of growing in strength. Suddenly when you ride on an indoor trainer in a virtual world, you can really just focus on your performance. You don't have to worry about cars. You don't have to worry about anything else. You can just put everything into your performance. So I started to see how Zwift was helping me to grow in strength. And then racing on the platform with my really good power to weight ratio, I was dominating, So when the virtual world champs arrived, I thought, well, I'm going to do it. It was quite late in the year. So I think it was in December, if I'm not mistaken. So it was really late to kind of keep your form all the way to December. But I thought I have to make the most out of this, because if I'm going to win a world title, it's here, And so for the first time in my career, I lined up on the virtual start line, in Zwift, really feeling like no one can beat me, I'm going to finish today the world champion, because I know I'm the best. And it was a really special moment, finishing, winning. It wasn't quite as easy as, well, not that I ever thought it would be easy, but actually, funny enough, Sarah Giganti, who is now coming through really beautifully on the road scene, she was the real challenge. So I just managed to pip her on the line for the sprint. It was a really, really proud moment, because I can now say that, I am a world champion. And of course, not everybody really respects the esports world as much as I do, or sees the potential as much as I do. But the reality still exists. It is an official discipline within the UCI, cycling portfolio. And I'm an esports world champion. So I'm really proud of it. And as I said, it was turning adversity into opportunity, which I'm also really proud of.
One of the things I find, and maybe you can give us some insight into this, because I've always wondered about this. We all know that, if you're on Zwift, you can tweak your weight to make sure that you're lighter than you actually are, so your power to weight ratio goes up. How do they control that at a World Championships, for instance? How do they make sure that everybody is their right weight's been put in and they're not twiddling the machine or anything like that? How do they ensure there's no cheating?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's always difficult to completely eliminate cheating. People always somehow find ways of cheating. But I have to say, I mean, the protocols are pretty comprehensive, So weigh-ins, we have to do a weigh-in before racing in Zwift. And it's quite a comprehensive protocol. It's going so far as to, taking a scale, getting on the scale as your own weight, showing the recording. You also have to show like what date and time it is. So Google something, what time is it, and you have to show that you're not adjusting the time or doing it 3 weeks prior or something like that. And then you have to have a known weight. So let's say a 5 kilogram dumbbell, you get off the scale, you have to put the 5 kilogram dumbbell on the scale and show that it's accurate. And then you have to get off, and then you have to get back on again, holding the weight that you used. And all of this has to correlate to show that it is accurate. So that's kind of a very quick summary of that protocol. And then, I mean, there is what we call ZADA. So like the WADA in Zwift, so they're also, once you've raced, you have to submit all your files. You have to have 2 files. So there has to be a power file that's recorded on like a Garmin or a Wahoo, and then the power file from the smart trainer itself. And if there's any discrepancies there, then that's another way of obviously indicating that one of the machines have been, or that your smart trainer has been tampered with. So, I mean, there's quite extensive protocols to make sure, especially for competitions of this level, like a World Championships. So for a World Championships as well, we all have the same trainers. So whoever the partner is, like, and when I won, it was Tax. I think more recently it's been Wahoo. But for a World Champs, Tax trainers are sent to all of the participants. So we're also all on the same brand, because there are differences also from brand to brand. So yeah, it's quite comprehensive to make sure there's no cheating.
Any tips for Ross to make sure he's better on Zwift? Because he was completely confused by the fact that he's beaten by people who are putting out lower wattages than he was on certain races. It's a game, isn't it, at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, so Zwift are trying to kind of find that balance between, being, a virtual world, a game. So I think that was part of the issue in the early days, that a lot of pros or people who ride outside will go, I'm a real cyclist, not a virtual cyclist. So they try to differentiate themselves, so that it's not, we don't try to compare it to the real world, because it is different. But the algorithm has evolved over the years. I would say when I raced in 2020, it was very much power to weight focused. But now they have tried to evolve it a little bit to take a little bit of the emphasis on weight away, because that can also lead to issues. I mean, we've had a lot of commentary just about Pauline Ferrand-Prévot and her weight, or, her skinniness at the Tour de France. So, I mean, that was also one of the issues with weight and with Zwift. So they have tried to kind of balance it out a little bit. So even in the day when I raced in 2020, there was what we call there's draft, so if you're sitting in the right place in the peloton on Zwift, then you're saving watts. But that's become more and more nuanced, so to perform really well on Zwift, you have to race on Zwift, because you need to learn what all these sort of tricks of the trade are, to make sure that you're saving watts, sitting in the right place in the bunch. It's also got a delay, so you've got to know when to kick, to make sure, for example, you win a sprint. But essentially, if you have a big climb in your race, then it will always come down to power to weight, because it's a no-brainer in terms of the algorithm. But they try, if it's a more balanced course with like rolling hills, then there's a lot of nuances you have to learn, Ross, to perform.
The one that got me was I did this stage race during the Tour de France. It was a stage every 3 or 4 days, and there were like 6 opportunities to do it. And one of them was a 13K time trial. So now there's no drafting, right? That's the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was losing like over 13K, so it's 19 minutes or whatever, like a minute to a guy who produced low absolute watts and relative. And then I looked it up, and if you ride a lot on Zwift, you earn droplets, and then you can buy better equipment.
Yeah.
So this guy had a better virtual aerodynamic time trial bike than I did. I was like, come on, man. This is not.
Yeah. So interesting. If it's competition, like, at the highest level, so if there's any like prize money on the line, or if it's a world championships on Zwift, then they neutralize all of that. So then, your equipment is all the same, irrespective of who's riding what bikes. So when it's at the highest level, it's pretty, legit in terms of everyone's on a fair playing field. But yeah, it's a bit annoying, I would imagine, in normal races, if that's the case. Yeah.
I mean, the difference is coming 293rd instead of 265th. I'm not losing sleep over it. But then the other thing,
they're trying to motivate you to ride more on Zwift, so that you can also get that bike.
They're manipulating my dopamine. And then the other thing, the draft, I'd underestimated the draft benefits. And then so one of our listeners actually wrote in and said, you got to get this app called Source. And then it's a plugin that you can put on Zwift, and you can see the draft benefit. And that really changed how I rode. So that draft was really good. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. That's actually a mistake I've still yet to this day need to perfect, is, being good at drafting. I generally, even Zwift races I've won, am, one of the highest power to weight ratios for the duration of the race.
And then the other thing on Zwift, and then we can, is sometimes you'll be in the pack and it's great, and you've got this like 180 draft benefits, and then Zwift spits you out to the left of the group and it drops to 0, and you say, but I don't want to be on the left.
I can't control that. Yeah.
I can't change my sideways direction, so now I'm screwed. Anyway, I will say that I did a bit of Zwift work ahead of this gravel race, and it's a massively powerful training stimulus if you do Zwift races. Such good training.
Certainly, yeah, because I mean, the reality is, the way I like to explain it to people is that it's basically like a gym workout, it's like a weights workout, but specific to cycling, because it's torque, it's based on torque, right? So you're always having to produce torque to be able to perform in the game. So it's really, it's definitely a great way to build absolute power.
Yeah.
Would you say, what proportion of your training in a normal year, not including COVID years, would be virtual training, and do you, and if it is a component to your training, where do you see the benefit coming?
So even last year with my my back injury, I spent a lot of time on Zwift again, because it was the safest place. I was really playing with some fine lines. I really seriously fractured my T10 vertebra, so I was in a proper comprehensive back brace. Thankfully, didn't have to have an operation. It was touch and go. But I was literally training.
I remember you reading that you, in fact, that was a crash you had on the finishing line in a sprint, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
And then you were literally in a brace, because if you moved a centimeter to left or right, potentially you could have been paralyzed. Was it as dramatic as that?
Yes, it was. Yeah, so it was an unstable fracture. It was a burst fracture of the T10, and a piece was protruding ever so slightly into the spinal column. So it was very risky in the first 2 weeks. Like, I had to be super, super cautious in the first 2 weeks. I slept with the back brace on because that's how afraid I was. I was like, if I need to go to the toilet in the night and I don't have my brace on, like, I don't want to move without it. Sure. Yeah, it was something I had to be really careful about, because it could have led to being paralyzed, but thankfully it didn't. And thankfully I've come out of it pretty well, considering the nature of the fracture. There was no damage to any of my nerves. So thankfully for that, I'm pretty much back to normal now. However, it did take quite a lot of time. I'd say only really in 1 year after. So that was in June this year, early June this year. It was 1 year after the injury. I would only say that I've properly recovered, after a year, because the reality is I lost quite a lot of height in the vertebra. It's now shaped like a wedge rather than a block. And so the muscles really had to adapt to the new shape of the vertebra. And so until June, I was really having a lot of problems with spasming of the muscles on either side of the vertebra. So throughout racing, I really needed a lot of support from our team physios to make sure, that I wasn't having problems in the race. But now I can quite comfortably say that I feel like I'm back to myself, or as close as can be. I'll never be exactly the same as I was before, because part of my body is totally different now. But I can say now I can train and race without issues with my back. But
so going back to that question about how you use Zwift in your training in a normal year.
I would say, so I do use Zwift a lot in terms of social aspects. So I have a virtual community called Rock Collective, and we have various different rides during the week. And so on a Sunday is usually our social ride, and I really enjoy these rides to join the community. Anyone can join. You don't have to be part of the community to join, but it's sort of like a podcast ride in a way. Like, we also have Discord channel, and people join the ride and I can chat to them, answer their questions. So I really like that part of Zwift, the social element. But then I do really believe that it's great in terms of building your power, and also not only power, but sort of the body-mind sort of connection. So on Zwift, I really feel that I can go so deep, because I'm not thinking about other things. You can just zone in. So it's like being in the zone. I really find Zwift is a great place to practice being in the zone. So that element, but then also the strength building element. So once a week interval session on Zwift. Obviously there's some periods where maybe it's a bit more difficult. So leading up to a grand tour, and at altitude, for example, then it's more difficult to include the Zwift training in. But I believe one session a week and a proper interval session is very beneficial.
And then you touched on very briefly, and I was going to get onto the subject, talking about Pauline Ferrand-Prévot and the discussions, and it's kind of part of a wider topic. So the discussions around Pauline's, obviously she was the winner of the Tour de France, but there was debate about her losing weight and how it was going to affect her health and all sorts of bits and pieces. What is endurance cycling? How does it affect, particularly for you as women? And I'm sure you speak to a lot of women in the peloton. We've done podcasts a couple of weeks ago where we've spoken particularly about women's issues in endurance sport. But there are things like your monthly cycle. There are all sorts of other hormones that go through your bodies, unlike us male guys. We've heard people like Kim talking about how it affected her at the start of the Tour de France this year. We've heard of Demi Vollering talking about it in the past, about women's issues. Is it something that can affect your career or your day, or how do you experience it? What do you think the average pro cyclist handles this things that us males never have to worry about?
Yeah, the reality is that as females, our hormones are fluctuating from day to day, which is less so for men. So it does mean that the chances of having a bad day, just somewhere, out of the blue, like you've done all the training, you've done all the preparation, you're in really great shape, but then, some bad day pops up. It's a bit more prevalent, I would say, because of our fluctuating hormones. It also influences, nutrition, how your body is absorbing carbs on a given day, so some have more pain than others during their menstrual cycle. But it becomes quite a personal thing. And I think you need to kind of figure out what works for you. So it's not one size fits all, some, technically speaking, I think if we speak to doctors and if we go really into kind of the science of it, then technically speaking, on the day before and the day of, I would say you actually are super, super strong, technically speaking. So it's about then managing the other things like the period pain and stuff, which some people are better at than others. So for the most part, I wouldn't say that my period has affected my career too much. But yeah, it is possible that you can have a bad day, because of your period or the place in the cycle that you're in. But there's now much more literature out there about how to manage the cycle, what supplements. So essentially, you can adjust supplements based on the period that you're in within your cycle. But I think where this becomes a little bit more challenging for pros is that not all of us are regular because of the stress. So it's not only always weight. Obviously weight is a factor, but it's also just the stress that we put on our bodies. So for a woman to have a normal menstrual cycle, essentially you need to, you want to be as normal as possible, but the stress of training, maybe other life stresses, plus sometimes being a bit aggressive with weight, all of these factors can contribute to losing the cycle. And then it becomes a little bit more difficult, for example, to then use supplements like zinc and magnesium and stuff like that to help support you during your cycle. It's hard to know where you are in your cycle, if you don't have a regular cycle. So it's challenging, that's for sure. But I think, as we talk more about it, it's not such a taboo topic anymore to talk about. So as people talk more about it, share more experiences, we learn how to manage. Some use contraceptive pills to manage their cycle. Personally, I don't. I believe that the contraceptive pill affects me negatively, not only in terms of performance, but psychologically. So I'm more inclined to be depressed if I'm on the pill. So I don't use the pill, but then, that means that I have no control over when I get my period or not.
Ross?
I'd be interested to know about the evolution of how it's managed in the pro peloton. Because when we spoke a couple of weeks back to an expert, and some of the stats were just outrageous. 70-something% of coaches don't understand the menstrual cycle. 80% plus don't talk to their athletes about it. And it feels to me like one of the permanent threats around all weight affected sports, and I think cycling might be top of that list. Maybe gymnastics is also on it, I don't know, or above it, is the younger we try and identify talented young women, and the more the sport becomes professional and competitive and deep, the more weight and watts per kilo is going to make a difference, right? So the sport needs to, in a sense, anticipate the threat. And it's not like this is not known, but I wonder whether teams that are scouting for young talented athletes are so mindful of this, or whether they really are way behind. What's your impression about how it's evolved since you first went to Europe? 15, 16 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely evolved a lot, and there's a lot more attention to it now, a lot more sort of understanding. There's a lot of education and around, Red S, so, but that's not only for women. Hey, I mean, men, we overlook it, but men also, are often playing in very gray areas when it comes to their weight because of the power to weight benefit. For example, my own team now are doing, we're partaking in basically a study. So we are required to sort of fill out every day on our training, how we felt and whether, where we are at in our cycle and stuff like that, so they can start gathering a little bit more information. But I'd say coaches are more open to it now. Women are speaking about it more, which is a good sign. But the reality around weight and power to weight is that I actually just published something earlier or yesterday or the day before actually on LinkedIn about the fact that the minimum bike weight rule is really not serving women's cycling very well, because it's very outdated. It's based on the average weight of a male. And in men's cycling, I would say it would be very difficult or very rare to find a male cyclist below 56 kilograms. But in women's cycling, it's very prevalent, So Niamh Fisher-Black, Guy Riolini, even myself. I mean, when I'm sort of in peak form, I'd be 49, 50 kilograms. And I've done quite a lot of sort of work on, being an engineer, also doing the calculations. And I'm convinced that the inflection point is 56 kilograms. I mean, more around 60 is, I suppose, where you really see the difference. But I'd say it already starts at 56 kilograms. That anything below 56 kilograms, we are hugely disadvantaged because of the minimum bike weight rule. And that's why, so the piece that I actually wrote, or a very short sort of summary of what I was saying, is just that the reason why we see more and more smaller riders like myself, so like anyone who's naturally in the range of like 50 to 52 kilograms, we see that these riders are just almost compelled to be super aggressive with their body weight, because that's the only way to adjust or to make up for the disadvantage of the 6.8 kilogram bike weight. So any rider I did a calculation to show that a rider that's 60 kilograms with a 6.8 kg bike versus a rider who's 52 kilograms with the same 6.8 kg bike, if we're both holding 5.5 watts per kilogram on a climb, the 60 kilogram rider is going to be holding a speed of 14.8 kilometers per hour, whereas the 52 kilogram rider at the same power output will be holding less speed. It will be 14.3 kilograms. So we have to be aggressive on our body weight to make up for the advantage of the relativity of the total weight of the bike and rider, and in the brute force, the brute power, the absolute power of the rider. So, I mean, I've been talking to the UCI for years about this. I mean, I started aggressively talking about it in 2019 behind closed doors, because I didn't want to, I didn't want to create too much of a hype about it, or I wanted to give the UCI the opportunity to look into changing it themselves. But it's now 2025. And despite the fact I keep talking about it behind closed doors, nothing is being done. So finally, I've decided I have to start talking out about it, because too many people aren't even thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not the only time the UCI has made rules that sort of work for men, and they seem to forget that women ride bikes also. The width is the same problem.
Exactly. And that, we're just a different profile in terms of height and weight.
But in effect, just to translate there, in case people listening to this aren't aware, the bike has to be 6.8. And so what proportion of teams are adding weight to the bike? Do you know? To make it
before the disc brakes, then I would say, so naturally speaking, like before disc brakes, my bike was most times very easily in the range of 6.2 kilograms. So then always had to add weight. And that's even more frustrating, because it changes the dynamic of the bike, because the weight cannot, the bike is not designed to carry that extra weight. And then usually the natural place to put it is, around the BB, so down your seat tube and position it around the BB to make sure that, the handling of the bike on descents and stuff isn't affected too much. But then the moment you climb, like as a climber, and you climb out of the saddle, which is something I like to do, then because all the weight's in the BB, it's like someone puts their hand on your jersey and pulls you back, because all your weight, the weight of the bike is then distributed to the back of the bike, and your weight is it comes more forward. So that was really, really annoying. I hated having weights added to the bike. I would say with the disc brakes, that's why I kind of calmed down on the whole conversation, because with disc brakes, it was very difficult to have a bike, and still to this day, I suppose it is quite uncommon to have a bike less than 6.8 kilograms, even in the smaller sizes. But we do have bike brands now who are really constantly pushing the barriers. And let's say Specialized is a very good example. There is now a disc brake Ethos bike, and I have one at home. It's part of our rental fleet, so it's not obviously my bike to race, but it's 6.2 kilograms with disc brakes. And I would love to race that bike, but I can't because it's illegal. And then I choose to rather ride the heavier tarmac, which is now nicely on 6.8 kilograms. So thankfully I'm not heavier than 6.8. But I prefer to ride that bike without added weight than the Ethos and add weight, because if you add weight to the Ethos, it just changes the dynamic of the bike, as I mentioned before.
Yeah, and then to finish that, then the problem is you have a fixed weight penalty irrespective of the size of the cyclist. And so when you have a bike from the bottom to the top of a climb that's 1,400 meters, they're carrying disproportionate weight. And so in a sense, do you think that that's then that's driving a race to be lighter? Because the only way then you can make up for the slower time is to add more, to take away even more from the denominator, the kilograms, right? That's in effect.
Exactly.
So when you have this conversation with them, do they make good noises and then nothing happens, or do they actually just tell you, thanks, we've got this covered?
They just tell me, yes, we know, but don't expect it to change.
Is it something they stick in? They're like, well, what do you want? Do you want us to weigh everyone at the start and then make everyone's bike limit relative to their body?
That is potentially the problem, is they don't know. Like, I suppose there's question marks about how to control it. I mean, I have a feeling it needs to go on like bike size, but then there's some comments going around where, okay, if you say like a 49 frame can be 6.2 kilograms, all built up, then what's to stop 1.7 meter rider riding a 49 frame with crazy long, stems and stuff? I think that's a bit crazy. Like, I don't think people would go that far, but that's kind of some of the commentary that comes out. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm actually going to be taking part in a UCI commission call tomorrow. And yeah, I will bring it up again and see what they say. But I think it's just the complexity of changing the rule, that they just don't want to even go there.
Yeah, I got the same impression of the handlebar width, because it's like, they say, what's the easiest thing for us to enforce? Let's do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's one perspective, and I guess you can understand it. Out of interest, when you're on those commissions, maybe this is your first one tomorrow, but in general, does the UCI do well at listening to its athletes or no?
So, I mean, to be honest, I'm actually on the UCI commission, not as an athlete representative. I'm just on the commission. So, yeah, I'm the only rider in this position. And yeah, I was requested. I've been on the commission now almost 2 years. So yeah, it's quite a privilege, but also a responsibility, a big responsibility, because I have a seat at the table. I have a voice, and sometimes there's quite a lot, to cover. I mean, they are receptive, like they're always open to listening. And I mean, to also defend the UCI to a certain part, I mean, they have a lot going on. There's a lot that happens at the UCI, and there's a lot of things that they do very well. But of course, there are a lot of mistakes that they make as well. And often the mistakes make the news more than what they do well. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, sometimes I do get the feeling that things aren't so well thought out. So let's say on the commission, for example, there was never any discussion about the handlebar width, so I don't know where that decision was made. So sometimes I think they have to make a lot of decisions, and sometimes they don't think them through enough, where talking about the handlebar width maybe would have been really productive to bring to the commission so that you can get outside perspective. It was never brought to the commission, So yeah, I mean, to the most part, they are receptive, but if it's too complicated, I suppose then sometimes, they have other more important matters to handle. So it gets sidelined, but yeah.
One of the interesting aspects of stuff that you've written about. And I know that, for instance, if anybody wants to have a look at some of Ashleigh's blogs, you can have a look at the Rokakoba website, and you've got your blog on there. But one of the that you wrote a few months ago was talking about the sort of dark space and the archaic space of professional cycling at the moment. And I kind of got a sense, it was, when you read it, it's talking about how riders are almost just treated as sort of a product that unless they produce, they're out. There's no sense of looking after riders, even if they're having a bad time, or in terms of their longevity and whether they can retire, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you could just talk us through that blog and what you wanted to get across in that blog about the pro cycling scene at the moment, and how you see some of those changes potentially happening.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the pro cycling scene is quite old-fashioned, and that's something quite frustrating. So, I mean, the industry brands are constantly evolving, pushing the limits, and the invention and the momentum in terms of bike brands and how the bikes evolve from year to year is mind-blowing. But pro cycling still seems to be quite stuck in tradition, the monuments, the history. I refer to sort of a recycled mentality. Again, I'm going to say it's a generalization. I'm not saying that it exists, everywhere. But there is just a trend of, past cyclists stepping up into management positions, which just means that the same sort of mentality just keeps, recycling itself year after year. And so we see less sort of innovation or less sort of out of the box thinking within the pro team infrastructures. And what I don't find, so, modern really, or forward thinking, is the fact that, it's more inclined to be teams are more inclined to want to have a situation where our riders are, they should just shut up and ride their bike, and they don't really, they don't provide a lot of support to the personal development of the riders. So to the people and who they are and what their interests are outside of cycling. There's this mentality that if you want to be the best in the world, you have to eat, sleep, drink cycling, and that's all you must do, But I don't believe that this is good for their longevity, So I'm an exception in myself, in that I come from a very highly educated background and came into cycling after the fact, and I greatly appreciate the life experiences and the studies and everything that I've developed as a person, because it makes me a more well-rounded person. It helps me to handle pressure better as well, because I have something else. I have something behind me. I have, against the will of many of my pro teams, continue to cultivate, my mind to think of projects or activities outside of cycling, hence Rokakoba cycling. I realized, I had a lot of pressure in the early part of my career that I had to do just that, eat, sleep, drink cycling. But what I found is I am just a thinker. I think. I'm an engineer. I'm trained to think and to solve problems. And if I don't use that capacity somewhere, then I overthink the racing. And to my detriment, because actually pro cycling is quite instinctual. If you really want to get the best out of yourself, you need to be in the moment and you need to make split-second decisions based on instinct, not too much on thinking. And so I found it actually quite counterproductive, or it was a disadvantage. My brain was a disadvantage as a professional cyclist. So I eventually, actually in 2015, when I joined the Cervelo Bigla project, this was like a life-changing experience for me, because finally the director or the owner of the team recognized who I am as a person, and he encouraged me to be the full person, Ashleigh, so not just a cyclist, but Ashleigh who also thinks, and so it was through my time at Cervelo Bigla that also we started the Rokakoba cycling project, because I was encouraged to be who I am. And I suppose what I've just started to realize, in the latter part of my career, for a long time, I just wasn't understood, so, oh, Ashleigh, wow, okay, yeah, she does a lot we don't understand it. Maybe even some comments like, oh, maybe if she did less, she would do better on the bike. But I think the contrary. I really do believe that to be the best version of myself on the bike, I need to do all the things that I do. And so, I just feel like pro cycling doesn't serve the people as riders, because we're taught to be very one-dimensional. We're taught to be very rigid, structured, but then it's actually a massive contradiction, because you get yourself in a race situation and the race hardly ever goes according to plan. So you have to be able to think on the spot, So, I just wish we would put a little bit more focus into developing the people behind the athletes and not just the athletes. And I think that that's actually more interesting anyways in this modern world. I think, especially for a female fan base, I think that results are actually not that important. Of course, as part of the story, winning a race would be an amazing story. But female fans are way more connected to the person, their interests. Do they resonate with them? So the background stories, sharing those stories, I think are an important part of the sport. And I think it's going to become more and more relevant into the future. And so that's what I'm referring to. I just wish teams would think a little bit more outside the box. It would and not only focus on victories, because I think it would just create a more healthy sport environment.
Ross.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a massive problem though, because it's like a system-wide problem whose solution only exists at the level of the parts of the system, if that makes sense. So I think one of the problems is, and I don't know how this plays out if you were to think of a solution, is let's say you're talking about a 21-year-old or younger even woman cyclist who's with Phoenix de Koning, for instance. She's got a contract there till 2027. Then hypothetically is going to go to Lidl Trek for 2 years, and then we'll get a 4-year deal at Movistar. Mm-hmm. So the problem is, I think, is Phoenix and Lidl, and they're saying that these contracts are short-term, maybe medium. The incentive for us to invest in life skills, like when your lifespan with us is so short, is so limited, and they don't see the incentive quickly enough. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of like, and I say it because like you're a product of South Africa, and you know how rugby works in this country. It's the same thing. Like it's going to be every year. There's 150 17-year-olds who want to play for the Springboks. And so it doesn't matter if 146 of them disappear, because next year there's another batch of 140. So the people who have influence don't have incentive.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but then I'm even referring to don't criticize the athletes if they are doing something else. So if they are studying something on the side, like online, or if they have other interests, it's just the mentality that that basically shames the rider that has any other interests. So it's just, I'm actually referring to just that simple fact, that we are not encouraged to develop ourselves outside of riding the bike. But I think that teams would be really forward thinking and dynamic if they did look into developing athletes, even helping build their brands and giving them social media support and stuff like that. Because especially if we're talking about females, I'm not sure, I can't speak for the men, but women are super loyal. If you feel that people really have your back and are investing in you as a person, you're more likely to stay there. You know what I mean? So it's less attractive to leave a team where you really feel supported and valued and, beyond your performance on the bike. So I'd say that riders would end up staying with the team for a longer period of time. So that's one element. But then the other element is you just kind of multiply your reach if you were helping the riders to do a better job of their social media, because the reach of the sponsors is just that much bigger. So you have to have big picture thinking to do that, and that's what cycling doesn't really have for the most part.
It's crazy though, because like everything you say is so logical and almost obvious. If you could invest in developing the personality of the rider, then A, it de-emphasizes results. What a pleasure for everyone concerned. And B, it makes them more likely to achieve results. So you're winning both sides of the coin, and they're going to reward you with loyalty. So it's almost like, why don't they do it? Is it just, what's the other side that we're not aware of here? Is it just, I don't know how to do it?
Control is one thing. So like, I suppose it's like governments, right? They don't want their people to think too much, because then, it's complicated to manage. So that's one big element is control, I would say. But as I said, I think it's just, there's too much of a recycled mentality. So riders who were conditioned to do exactly what we're saying then come into management positions. So why would they do anything differently? All they know is to eat, sleep, drink, cycling.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's a capacity issue, I suppose. There's quite a lot to juggle in a pro team, and most of the emphasis is always placed on performance and logistics and stuff like that, quite rightly so. But I think it's also just a missed opportunity, because maybe it does require hiring or investing in something extra. But it should produce returns, because if you're helping your athletes be better brand ambassadors or to learn other skills, then it should multiply the return for your partners. But they're just focusing on what they can control.
From what I've read, and I've read a few articles on the team that you're involved with, AG Insurance. Now, for those of you who can look back on it, it's quite an interesting sort of story. But the person that seems to have really developed that team and the founder of that team was a woman by the name of Natasha van Oden, who left last year. But I sense that she was one of those athletes, one of those managers that kind of cared very much for the people that were riding for her. And there was a very good feeling within the team. In fact, she was the person that got Kim McCourt on the team, and yourself as well. But was that a good example of somebody who really kind of took cycling beyond just the performance of the riders?
Yeah, Natasha's exceptional. So she thinks exactly the way I'm thinking and talking to you. She really believes in developing the person, not just the athlete. She's got really great vision in terms of, well, firstly, has a great eye for talent, and then also a great philosophy around, building the foundation and not just focusing on the top tier, being World Tour. So when, her big vision with the whole AG project was to have the complete pathway, so junior, under 23 and elite. Unfortunately, since she's left, the junior element has disappeared. So now we're just under 23 and elite. But Natasha is amazing. Big picture, out of the box thinker, and definitely, person I resonated with very well, and hence why I joined the team. But since the departure, things have changed a bit. So it has gone a little bit more towards the traditional way of doing things.
Was she a former cyclist, or did she come in without cycling, let's call it, for want of a better word, baggage?
No, she was a former cyclist. Her husband also. He worked on Sky for 12 years, to be honest, as one of their director sportifs. Servasknaven, he won the Paris-Roubaix for sure, but I'm not sure if he won a stage at the Tour, that I'm not sure of. But they're just a very dynamic couple. They have 4 daughters. She studied physiotherapy after her career as a cyclist, and then has gone on, I suppose, to further her knowledge and studies in, sports psychology and that type of thing. But it's the family that they are. Their daughters, they've always encouraged them. They have all ridden. They're not all still riding, but they were always encouraged to be very balanced, to pursue their other passions, their other interests as well. They're really great people. I really have a lot of respect for the Knavens.
If the UCI Commission in your meeting tomorrow said, do one thing to make this system better, what do you reckon it would be? You could put something in place, because you want to try and incentivize these behaviors that I think we agree are good and correct. But I think you're right. You were right earlier. It's harder to do that than to just micromanage and dictate to people. I think that's probably the biggest reason, to oversimplify. So what would you do?
I don't think it's for the UCI really to solve, but like if we talk a little bit about One Cycling, which is a project that a few of the World Tour teams, the men's teams in particular, but some of them obviously own women's teams as well. They're trying to put together a company owned, with stake from the team. So the teams would have stake in the company, and they're trying to create a more sustainable future for cycling. And the big focus at the moment that they're placing on is on TV rights and some other elements around the races. But I think that they're focusing on the wrong thing. So I think TV rights is not where this new entity should focus. They should actually be focusing on the storytelling element. So if we look at Drive to Survive, its popularity on Netflix with Formula One, and has literally transformed the sport of Formula One, and grown its fan base. I believe the same can exist for cycling. And if you place, if there's a value proposition in behind the scenes content and in the people and who they are, then the teams would be more likely to open their minds and to think differently and to invest in the riders if we were telling the stories of the people and not just seeing how a race transpires and who wins. So I believe it's not necessarily the UCI. I believe that One Cycling needs to move in this direction, or the teams themselves need to move in this direction. The one thing they do have ownership of is their story. They don't have ownership of the TV rights, and they don't have control necessarily of the performance, but they have control and ownership of the story they can tell and the story of their athletes. So I think this is hugely overlooked.
Yeah,
I think they've.
Sorry, just going to say you're right. It's not the UCI's problem to solve, but if they solved it, they'd also benefit from it.
No, I mean, so that's the other thing. The UCI could create this platform, I suppose, if they wanted. But then we go back into the scenario where what do the teams have, and how can they create other revenue streams for themselves? So that's why I would say a better outcome would be that the teams themselves invest in this, because otherwise they're going to go down the same road of not owning anything and not having access to revenue that could come from exposure through a platform like this. And I mean, obviously, like Netflix did put on a series around the Tour de France for the men, and it's now just been slammed and actually it's off the cards completely. And I'd say the mistake with that is that Netflix were doing it. So it brought a Hollywood element to it, and they don't really understand cycling. So they're not, the pro cycling world or the teams or the riders themselves are dissatisfied because they're not portrayed as who they really are. So that's why I say pro cycling, the teams need to take ownership of it, because then they own how the story is told.
Yeah. They seem to force stories that were unnecessary, because, like, it seems to me, I mean, I'm an outsider, but it seems to me that there are stories within cycling that tell themselves, but Netflix seem to try and force overly dramatic things in there. That's my assessment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Just a question from me. If you look down the path of 5 years, and what do you think women's cycling should be like in terms of its exposure? What do you see in that crystal ball?
Well, I mean, I definitely see and wish that there will be more focus on storytelling and behind the scenes, and getting to know the athletes and the stories behind the athletes, because I do believe that that's the way we unlock a new audience, and increase the audience, because now it's very much sort of male dominated still. It's obviously growing with interest from women, but still too many men. My ideal picture would be that teams become more of like a cultural movement, and not just so focused on race results. And don't get me wrong, I love racing. I love the excitement of it. I love the fact that, what winning a race brings. But I think that there's so much more to the sport.
Can I ask about the structure of the season that will facilitate that? There's been some conversation recently. I think Demi Vollering was quoted as saying there's enough race days, but then at the same time, there's all this talk like it's successful. Let's do more, which I think is it's a temptation people fall into. Do you think like the three tours, the way they're positioned, the Tour de France Femmes, the way that it's done is like I think it was 9 stages. Is that how you would like to see it consolidated, or do you think we need 2 weeks?
I mean, I think
say 2 weeks. Say 2 weeks.
I think it works. I think it works really well the way it is, because for one reason, it allows riders to do all 3 of the Grand Tours, for example. So you can, which is less likely for men. It keeps it really exciting. So it keeps the audience engaged for the full period. However, I mean, I do see a potential to 2 weeks. I wouldn't go 3 weeks. Like it would be possible to go to 2 weeks with a rest day in between, because it would obviously it would expand on the allowing for real Grand Tour riders to develop. Because I would say at this point in time, we still have all-rounders, so one-day races are still super good at Grand Tours and can win the yellow jersey. If we take Demi Vollering as an example, even Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, I mean, she won Paris-Roubaix and now she wins the Tour de France. You're not easily going to see that in men's cycling because by being a longer Grand Tour, it's a different type of rider. Wins a Grand Tour. So I think what it can allow for is a little bit more specialization in Grand Tour. So I'd say you'd see the more likes of a Sarah Giganti or whatever kind of rise to the top in these type of situations. But yeah, I wouldn't go longer than 2 weeks. I think that would take away the exciting element of women's cycling where you sort of kept on the edge of your seat till the last stage.
Yeah, in fact, my hot take is I'd rather see the men's tours come down to 2 and meet the women's at 2 than the opposite. A couple of semi-related questions. Like in the one-day classics, the monuments, for want of a better word, you have the Flanders model where the women race the same day as the men, and then you have the Paris-Roubaix where it's the Saturday for the women, Sunday for the men. Which of those do you prefer to see happen more of?
I think that the separate days model, I think, allows for each race to really be celebrated for what it is. Whereas if you do it the other way around, then one has to kind of be a little bit in the shadows. And I mean, we've been quite fortunate, really, that the Flanders Classics really championed women's cycling over the past 2 years now, where we've actually got the later slot, which I think has been good for the sport because often we were always put in the early slot when people aren't even really watching, it's not prime time. So I think that's always the challenge. When you have the 2 races on the same day, you're competing a little bit for prime time. There are some races that do work quite well like that if it can be structured that way. So like Amstel Gold, for example, works well in that format because the women's race can finish not long before the men's race, so then you have the same crowds out there and the energy is insane, and it's not such a big problem for primetime viewership because you're finishing close to each other. But then again, women's cycling often loses out because they have to jump to the men's, you know what I mean? So on the same day, you're always competing a little bit. Whereas if you're on separate days, you can each race can have its own, it can be championed, for what it is. But I think there's not one sort of size fits all. As I said, some races suit quite well to do on the same day because of the way the courses are positioned, and the men's and women's race can become, kind of quite nicely intertwined, that you're reaching the same audience at the same time. But there are races where it doesn't work well. So like Liège-Bastogne-Liège, if they're on the same day, then the women it's from point to point. So there isn't really a circuit, and it makes it quite difficult. One has to be that much earlier than the other or that much later than the other. I don't know if I'm making sense.
That does make sense. I mean, from a viewer perspective, I love the weekend of Paris-Roubaix.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're a fan, then you have 2 days of racing to watch rather than one.
Yeah, and I love the fact that the Tour de France finishes and then the women's tour is like, it's right there, and it's like it's just a 5-week long cycling festival. Terrific.
Yeah, that works really well, and I think we will see now that that's going to start changing with the Giro and the Vuelta as well, which I think must happen because. Yeah, so next year the Giro will also be in May for the women, and I think the Vuelta will go back to the August slot because that's super confusing for people now. Vuelta is in May for the women, and it's in August for the men, and the Giro is in July for the women and May for the men. So yeah, I think the Tour have really nailed that one on the head, and I think more are following now.
That's great. I mean, my last thought is, and I don't want to cross-pollinate or share from other sports, but like I said, I work on World Rugby now with World Rugby, and one of those is to sit on like the women's high performance committee, and women's rugby is growing like at an exponential rate, maybe not quite as fast as women's cycling is, but it's the fastest growing market by a lot. The World Cup's coming up. It's going to break all the records. And often I sit in those meetings and you discuss with people like the calendar issues, the player welfare concerns around women's rugby. And like men's rugby's got 30, 40 years worth of those conversations. But women have got this like really cool opportunity to innovate. You don't have to imitate.
No,
And
exactly.
really it's funny because sometimes people say, well, we got to do X, Y, Z because that's what the men did. Well, no, you can actually go in a completely different direction. And yeah, I hope that people get really creative. And then with that in mind, you're going to, at some point, you've set yourself up for a life in cycling, right? You've got Roka Korba. You're going to be a director of a team one day and do the storytelling you've told us all about. Have you thought about that much or no?
Yeah, working on some stuff already in the background, but not a director sportif. I need to be in a higher position. I don't want to just be behind the steering wheel. I want to be steering the direction of the project.
That's cool. Yeah, awesome. Man.
That's cool.
Good.
Yeah. Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
You have been listening to the Science of Sport podcast.